Hello everyone! For this week we're going to do a brand new top 10, and in this one I'm going to talk about my top 10 creepy stories in World of Warcraft. These are the stories that are bizarre, they're scary, they're creepy or simply spooky. These are the stories that we're going to talk about today. For those that have seen other top 10s made by other people similar to this one, you might find a few similarities, but I hope I'll be able to surprise you with a few of my picks. So ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to close the curtains, dim those lights, gather around, and let's talk about some creepy stories. Starting this list, I've placed the story of the Deadmines at number 10, especially with the Cataclysm revamp. The story behind the Deadmines is that once upon a time, after the Horde had destroyed Stormwind, but also were defeated by the Alliance, someone had to rebuild the city. For this job, they hired none other than Edwin Van Cleef, Guildmaster of the Stonemasons Guild, and he and his people, they delivered an excellent job. They rebuilt the city to even greater than it was. When it was time to pay though, the nobles refused to pay what was promised. They were infiltrated by the Black Dragon Onyxia, disguised as Lady Katrana Prestor, and she had convinced them all that paying the Stonemasons was not a good idea. They refused to hand over all of the gold that Van Cleef was promised, and not even King Varian was able to defuse the situation, so Van Cleef and his people, they led a riot through the streets as they escaped the city. During this riot, Van Cleef's wife Tiffin was hit by a stone. She lost her life, while the Stonemasons Guild, they took up the name of the Defiance Brotherhood, and they made their base within the Deadmines. They had a plan in mind of building a massive ship, which they would use to assault the city they had built and get their revenge. But before all of that could happen, so-called heroes, they were informed on the bounty on Van Cleef's head, and groups of them, they went into the Deadmines to bring him to justice. Van Cleef fell dead on the floor as we cheered and gloated over our victory. We decapitated him, we took his head as proof of demise, but from the shadows, his daughter came out and she saw the decapitated corpse of her father. This led to Vanessa Van Cleef picking up the mantle of leader of the Defiance Brotherhood and us once again go into the Deadmines, taking care of business, take out this leader. All of this on its own, it isn't really creepy, although a young girl seeing her father decapitated on the floor is a gruesome image, I have to admit. But the day that I realized that we weren't truly the heroes, that was the day that I was creeped out. Back in the day when I started doing Deadmines, I didn't know the storyline, I didn't really understand the lore, I didn't know what was going on. The realization came later, and in this situation, I don't believe that Van Cleef was really the bad guy. He was just a man doing his job. He got screwed over by the nobles of Stormwind, they placed a bounty on his head, and these so-called heroes, they took him out, while his own little girl had to watch, had to find his corpse on the ship. We're not really heroes, we just want gold and shiny loot, we get manipulated, get put on the dirty jobs, and this realization just creeped me out. At number 9, I've placed the Witch of Nagrand, Chell. This one is an oldie but a goldie. Chell, she was part of Nagrand during the Burning Crusade, and she was hidden away in her own little area. At first, we didn't really know much about this troll, except that her campsite had the most bizarre things placed together. You had little children scattered all over the place. Chell was chilling next to a cauldron. You had a few cages with bones piled up inside, a couple of explosives buried in the sand, a doghouse with some juicy meat still rotting inside. All of this had people speculate that Chell might be a witch who feeds on the flesh of the young. Warlords of Draenor came around to fill in the blanks. We found out that Chell is actually a shape-shifting witch, and she's responsible for the death of Garrox, his wife. She kills to stay young, and in our reality no one ever came to take her down. How many parents have gone mad with grief over losing their children? How many children have been captured by this witch, knowing that sooner or later their time would come? The time where Chell would approach them, most likely be ever so kind, ever so sweet. The Wicked Witch of Nagrand, feeding off the innocent, she has definitely earned her spot on this list. Number 8. The list wouldn't be complete without this creature. It's Tereus from Naxxramas. The undead, Scourge, Arthas the Lich King, all of that is pretty grim and dark. You'll find many examples of the undead creepiness on this list, but Tereus is something special. When you fight through Naxxramas, you'll sometimes hear a female voice scream in the distance. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just figured it was part of the ambience connected to Naxxramas. But later I found out that those screams, they had a source and could actually make it stop. You could save these poor souls. As Commander Elagor Dawnbringer and Winterguard Keep, he explains how each boss works, their background, and for Tereus, he says that he's built from the flesh of women and children. It is said that their souls are fused together, eternally bound within that foul prison of flesh. The flesh of women and children taken by the scourge, transformed into this hideous being. During the encounter, Tereus screams, "Now you feel pain," and as we put him out of his misery, with his dying breath, he thanks us.
Thank you.
The screams are no more, an eerie silence penetrates the floating citadel. May their souls find peace, and may none be mad enough to create another being like Tereus. Number 7 took place during the expansion that most found very childish, during the expansion Mists of Pandaria. On the surface, the Pandaren all look pretty cute and cuddly with their beer parties, their big bellies, but underneath goes a pretty grim history. The Mogu had enslaved the Pandaren and cared not for what happened to them. The Pandaren were ordered to build the Great Serpent Spine, a massive wall separating the Mogu Empire from the Mantids, and of course the Mantids, they didn't let them build this wall without a fight. Generations of Pandaren were simply thrown at the wall, sent to the slaughter, but one day Kang, Fist of the First Dawn, he had enough. He rose up and he showed his fellow Pandaren that they did not need any weapons to fight against the Mogu. Their bodies were hardened by the hard labor they were put through, and their own fists would become their weapons. He was the first of the Pandaren monks, and he taught his people to no longer fear the Mogu, and from that moment on, the Pandaren would lead their own destiny and their own empire. During Mr. Pandaria, the Mogu returned, and the horrors of the past came with them. During the Golden Lotus daily quest, we were sent to fight against the Mogu, and most of these quests, they were pretty normal. You would destroy a few cannons, you would kill a few enemies, you know, the usual daily quests. But 2 of them, they really struck me as I realized what I was doing. The first one is called Acts of Cruelty, in which you're sent to rescue 5 torture victims. Pandaren were literally being tortured by the Mogu out in the field, but that was just the beginning. These were the lucky ones, and they were rescued, since another quest called Free the Spirits, it sends you to liberate Pandaren spirits from captivity of the Mogu. Imagine for a moment that an ancient enemy that had enslaved your entire race, it is now returned with a vengeance. You sit cowering in the corner, waiting for the torment to finally end. And was it not for us, these Pandaren spirits, they would have remained prisoners, surrounded by these banshee-like creatures, and at the mercy of the Mogu. An eternity imprisoned, an eternity captive, an eternity tormented. That is awaits these spirits that we never liberated. Number 6 is reserved for the Darkmoon Fair, and you might wonder how such a happy little place on Azeroth could earn a spot on the creepy list, but the Darkmoon Fair, it holds many secrets and mysteries. If you die on the island, you can find restless spirits all over the island, and each talks about the way that they died or the way that they came in touch with the fair. For example, Sifara Wellspawn, she died while gathering firewood for their campsite. Cup Coincare, a male goblin, he says that Silas was able to repay most of my debt as long as I worked at the fair. Most of my debt was repaid, I think. My debt was almost repaid. No one was going to miss those last gold coins. I didn't think anyone would mind if I didn't stay to help run the fair. Which implies that he was working on his debt by working at the fair, but he believed that he was done and they wouldn't mind him leaving. I guess that was not entirely the case, considering that he's a spirit now, and there are even rumors going around that the leader of the fair, Silas Darkmoon, he is not what he seems to be. There's a spirit that claims that his home was called Strom, and many years ago Strom was turned into Stromgarde. It's possible that he simply shortens the name, or perhaps Silas, he's quite a dark individual. In the comics, there was the story of the fair, in which Kerry Hick, the strongest woman alive, she was falsely accused of murder. They spent their time trying to prove her innocence, but in the end, they were forced to break her out of jail, but luckily they also found a witness that was able to testify to Kerry's innocence, but the real killer was never truly punished. Cedric Falruk had indeed killed his own brother Eric, but his father was unable and unwilling to kill his last son. He did believe that he was guilty though, so he gave Cedric a bunch of gold, he told him to go far away, but before Cedric was even able to set a foot out the door, the strongest lady punched him from behind, and the people of the fair gave him their own piece of justice. The Darkmoon Fair is family, and like all families, they take care of each other. Silas had Cedric placed next to his deceased brother, and the final thing that you see in the comics is the coffin being shut and Cedric screaming at the top of his lungs. The Darkmoon Fair is all fun and games. It can be the happiest place on Azeroth, as long as you play by the rules, as long as you don't mess around. Number 5, I've reserved for Sylvanas, and specifically the Forsaken activity surrounding the Plague. Remember the Plague that was used at the Wrath Gates? I think I've shown that cinematic maybe once or twice, of course not that often, but what's happening there is that Sylvanas is betrayed by some of her own people, and they use the Plague against the Arthas, but also the Horde and the Alliance. This Plague, it didn't just pop up out of existence, it was developed and created by the Forsaken themselves, and Sylvanas, she was hell-bent on getting revenge. Of course, creating such a plague, it does not happen instantly. They had to test their creations, and they tested it not only on the undead, they also used it on the living. Unfortunate dwarves, humans, orcs, they were trapped in cages and forced to gulp down experiment after experiment. Even now, you can see Apothecary Kiefer working on a blight and experimenting on living creatures, eventually turning one into a sheep, which explodes. You also have Teresa, a human girl turned to a mindless slave, and she's possibly a reference to a Fable character, but in World of Warcraft, they broke her spirit, they removed certain parts of her brain, while stimulating other parts of her brain. She's forced to do whatever they tell her to do, and that's just a few of the examples you can find within the Undercity. Outside, we can't forget about the blight that he used to utterly destroy Southshore, or the camp where they've planted living humans into the soil. We get a quest where you can either bash their heads in, you can either save their life, or you can save their life and then bash their heads in. The Forsaken's actions are truly some of the creepier things you'll find in Warcraft. Number 4 is for one of the more recent events that happened within Warcraft. It's the bombing of Theramore. Picture this for a moment. One of the leaders of the Horde, he sends you a warning. The Horde is getting ready for war and they're planning to assault your city. They're planning to assault Theramore. He cannot stand at your side, nor will he neglect his duties to the Horde, but Jaina's actions in the past, they compelled Bane to give her this warning. That's the situation Jaina Proudmoore was placed in within the novel Tides of War, in which Garrus and the Horde, they got ready to assault Theramore. Jaina asked for help from the Alliance to defend her city, which she got of course, and even the Kirin Tor sent her their aid. All were ready, and for a time it seemed like they could actually hold, that they could win this war, but all of it was just a charade. Garrosh had never planned to win Theramore by fighting like this. He was ready to throw any sense of honor out of the window, and all of this was just a plan to draw as many of the enemy forces as he could. In the sky, the stolen focusing iris was being transported by a zeppelin, and they had transformed this magical item into a mana bomb. The Blue Dragon Caligos, he tried to stop it, he was unable to, and the Maze Ronin, he saw no other choice than to draw the bomb upon himself, upon Theramore, to keep the explosion within their protective shields. He teleported Jaina away seconds before impact, and he sacrificed his life for his beloved and for the world. Due to his actions, the arcane radiations was kept to a small area, but as Jaina returned to her home, she found herself living a nightmare. People she had loved, people she had fought with, had talked with, had shared their life with, they were all blown up, her entire city was gone. Eerie corpses were floating in the sky, and her apprentice Kindy was dead on the floor. With tears in her eyes, Jaina tried to hold and touch the small body, but as she did, the body disintegrated into a pile of violet sand. This moment broke the once peace-loving Jaina Proudmoore and would forever change her, but this was just the start. Eventually the storyline, it guided us into the Siege of Orgrimmar, where we found out that Bane's warning to Jaina, it simply had not been enough. They were warned in time. Jaina was able to gather help and send those who didn't or couldn't want to fight away from the coming battle. Women and children and innocents were placed on boats, assumingly to a safe haven, but during the siege we found out that some of them, maybe all of them, simply didn't make it. They were captured by the Horde, women and children were taken, and their parents were placed against each other to fight, because if they didn't, the Horde would hurt their little ones. Garrosh's crimes went further than just starting a war. He had taken civilians, he had taken innocents, he forced them to fight simply for their amusement. Blizzard is damn right, they took Garrosh very far in the role as the bad guy, putting people against each other with the threat of "we'll kill your children." That's just cruel, man, that's just dishonorable. It's a bad guy, that's for sure. Which brings us to the top 3 of the list, and at number 3 I've placed something that can't really be avoided in a list like this. It's the Tower of Karazhan. This place is creepy in many ways, and I guess that's unavoidable when a corrupted guardian has lived and died inside of it. For those that don't know, the guardian Medivh lived in this tower, and he was possessed by the dark titan Sargeras. Sargeras manipulated events, he started the first Orcish horde invasion of Azeroth, but eventually Khadgar friends, they figured out what was going on, and they stabbed Medivh. This caused Sargeras to come to the surface. He was decapitated before it could materialize, but his plans were already in motion. The orcs invaded the planet, that all happened, and his demise, the demise of Medivh of the Guardian inside Karazhan, it's speculated to be the reason for the cursed land of Darkshire. In the tower itself, we have visions of the past and the future. We have ghosts haunting the halls, being forced to party forever. And then there's the ghost of Medivh's father, tormented and terrified that his son would return.
Who are you? What do you want? Stay away from me! Please, no more! My son! He's gone mad! I'll not be tortured again!
There were rumors going around before World of Draenor that Blizzard might actually use Karazhan again for some sort of event, and perhaps these plans were real, perhaps it was just a rumor, but they never implemented it. It's quite a shame though, since there's still a part of Karazhan that has never seen the light of day. Many have probably heard of the Upside Down Sinners, which is a pool of water where you can find unfortunate souls chained upside down, dead corpses right next to Karazhan. It's uncertain how or why they're exactly there, but you also have to wonder why they even programmed this. We know from other stories, like the Dark Riders for example, that you don't want to mess with Medivh, that's a given. The Dark Riders, they used to be traveling merchants who tried to cheat Medivh by selling him some fake artifacts, and that's something you don't want to do. They fell under his wrath, he cursed them, forcing them to ride out and collect real artifacts of power, bring them back to the tower, and perhaps these so-called sinners, they tried to do a similar thing and they were punished by Medivh. That is of course one possibility, perhaps there's a completely different story to tell, who knows, perhaps one day they'll be given a proper place in the storyline, perhaps one day they'll actually open up the crypts. For now though, they're just there to creep you out. That's not even the worst Karazhan has to offer though. I mean, have you ever been underneath the tower? There is some sicko over the Blizzard that has programmed some really messed up stuff under there, and I'm afraid to show you on screen, but here you go, this is it man. Truly creepy. Number 2 goes to Scholomance, a story which is not widely known and unfortunately not really in the game anymore. In the past, Scholomance was the Baroff's family manor and their prime residence amidst their far-reaching empire. Eva Sarkov and her husband Lucian, they're the ones who used to tell the story in-game, and they were servants to the family. Over time, the Baroff family, they started to fall to paranoia and their greed caused arguments between them. They wanted a way to preserve their fortune and hold of the land past their lifespan, and luckily for them, Kel'Thuzad had just the solution. He offered them the promise of immortality, and in exchange the Baroff family, they handed over their home, which was turned into a school of necromancy. All kinds of vile experiments took place within, and as each week passed, the House Baroff became more and more decrepit and twisted. Dark beings began to take residence in the various wings of the house. For 6 months, Eva and Lucian, they were able to survive by sneaking food and water, while they were forced to listen to the tormented screams at night. These were servants who had already been captured, and one day the inevitable happened. The 2 remaining servants were captured as well. They were stripped of all clothes, laid down in a circle of blood. They sat there for days, naked and terrified, as the undead surrounded them, constantly tormenting them with horrifying acts of depravity. Finally, when he came, he introduced himself as Dr. Teolan Krasteno, but they would get to know him as the Butcher and were used in his vile experiments.
The doctor is in.
He exposed them to pain that they didn't know existed. He used them in countless experiments to devise a plague. Days turned into weeks. They would have died on that very first day of capture, was it not for the magical means which kept them alive. Finally, the Butcher was done with his experiments, as they'd been drained of all life. Their spirits were shattered, and they thought that the sweet embrace of death was upon them, and they welcomed it with open arms. Unfortunately for them, the Butcher was cruel. He revived them from death's door one final time, and he fed them to his ravenous ghouls. He laughed as he watched the fiends devour their flesh, and now their spirits remained within limbo, unable to leave until the remains are found and their spirits laid to rest. We were sent in to take care of these sinners, to clear up Scholomance and put a halt to the vile actions taking place within. There were so many creepy things going on inside that it would take quite some time to list it all, but it's no surprise that Scholomance was chosen to be updated during the Cataclysm. Sadly, the story did change quite a bit, but the memories of this place are quite creepy, and I will never forget the day that I read this, that I saw the video, and I was like, what? Did this really happen? I had no idea, and it's quite a creepy story. What could possibly top that creepy story? What could be at number 1? Well, for me, it's the Emerald Nightmare as described within the novel Stormrage. As creepy as it is when people are used in experiments like this, for me the idea of being trapped in a nightmare, which feels so very much like it's real, that's just a scary thought on its own. I need my beauty sleep, man, and to think that it would be disturbed like that, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself and I should explain the story first. In the novel Stormrage, we find out that the Emerald Dream has been turned into the Emerald Nightmare by the old god N'Zoth and his companion Xavius. In this nightmare, it causes people to fall asleep, never wake up again, while having their worst nightmares nearly come to life. These dreamers feed the nightmare fuel, causing a chain reaction of falling victim, empowering it at the same time, causing more victims. Some died of fright in their sleep, while others struck out while dreaming. The nightmares were never the same either. For example, Marshal Duggan, in his dreams he was sent on a relatively simple mission into Jasperlode Mine. There they were supposed to clear the area of the infesting kobolds, but in his nightmare the mission became a lot more difficult. The mace they brought with them, Zaldimar, he betrayed them all and he resurrected the slain kobolds. This piece is taken from the book. They serve me now, as I serve our rightful lord, rasped Zaldimar, his grinning face like a skull. And as you will, good Marshal. The kobolds move forwards. Marshal Duggan and his men press together. It won't hurt long. Utterly silent, the kobolds surged forwards. Duggan smashed through the throat of one, which had no effect. In desperation he struck harder and lopped off the entire head, but the body kept attacking. I must leave you for a little while, Zaldimar murmured. I have to prepare for Goldshire next, a task with which you and your soldiers will assist once you've been converted. Damn you! But Marshal Duggan cut off as the necromancer vanished, and with him the light. The air grew thick. Harsh, the fetid smile of that kobold was everywhere. Without the magical illumination, he could not see the figures coming toward him. A man shrieked. Sounds of fear arose from the others. Duggan could do nothing to help. He was desperately trying to fend off the horrific tide of attackers. Another man cried out. A moment later, the monstrous sound of something moist being torn apart echoed in the shafts. Marshal? The man next to him pleaded. Keep fighting! But then Duggan nearly fell to the side as the soldier was dragged past him. The hapless fighter called out again, then produced a sickening scream as the familiar soft sound of weapons thrusting into flesh echoed from the walls. The clash of arms grew fainter, fainter. Marshal Duggan knew he was the last standing. He felt the undead kobolds converging on him. For the first time, their eyes glowed, a deathly white aura that sent shivers up his spine. And among them, he saw the illumination of the eyes of taller figures, torn and beaten figures, from what he could make out. His own men, now part of the ungodly throng. They surged forwards. Marshal Duggan swung wildly. His mace met flesh again and again, but the kobolds and the mutilated soldiers with them, they pushed on unimpeded. They were everywhere now, seizing at him with their claws, biting or striking him with their weapons. He cried out as the undead overwhelmed him. This is all a nightmare, of course, but imagine your worst fear nearly becoming a reality. A reality you cannot escape and have to relive over and over again. That is the fate that awaits those that are stuck within the nightmare, and this was just a simple mission to clear out the mine. Nearly all of Azeroth was hit by this, so people like Sylvanas also fell victim. Sylvanas dreamed that she was a high elf once again, only to be betrayed by Varimafras to be tormented by the Lich King. Jaina dreamed that she assisted Arthas with the Purge of Strathholm instead of walking away, and that she was the one to pick up the cursed blade Frostmourne. These are just a few examples of the endless possibilities, and the fear of being stuck within your worst nightmare, to me, makes this the creepiest story in Warcraft. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of my little top 10 video. There are plenty of other choices, of course. You had the Goldshire Kids, you had the Headless Horseman, you had the Origin of the Centaurs, but these are just my picks. If you want, leave a comment down below with your creepiest story or moment within Warcraft. I'm sure plenty have had moments in Goldshire, for example, or perhaps Hellfire, which still haunt you to this day. I can't wait to read what you have to say. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos. And until next time, guys, see ya!